Happy New Year, guys. We are back for the first breakdown video of 2024. In this video, we're going to be taking a deep dive into all of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC Fight Night Ankalaev versus Walker. From a betting perspective, hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. 2023 was a good year for us across the board, and hopefully we can build on that, do even better in 2024. Big New Year's resolution of mine is to try and get these breakdown videos out sooner for you guys. I know I say that every year, and then when the UFC events start racking up week after week after week, I fall behind. But we're coming in fresh for a new year. That's why we're getting this video out a little bit earlier than usual. So let's jump right in to talking about the main event, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker, which is, of course, is a rematch of a fight that took place not that long ago, back in October. So this fight ended under really strange circumstances. I've only got so much hard drive space with the amount of fights that I watch, so I've kind of forgotten about what happened in this matchup. So I'll just give you a quick recap if you can't remember. Basically, Ankalaev had taken Walker down, and Walker was in a position where he was trying to use the cage to kind of wall walk back up to his feet, and Ankalaev caught him with an illegal knee. It was a decently hard shot, but didn't really affect Walker that much, and you could see that Walker recovered almost immediately. Now, because it was a pretty hard illegal knee, Walker was pretty annoyed, and he was very vocal to the referee about how upset he was that Ankalaev had even thrown a strike like that, which was clearly illegal, and the referee misinterpreted Walker's anger at the illegal strike as Walker not being able to continue. Of course, Walker's first language is Portuguese, so they didn't communicate very effectively. The fight was stopped pretty quickly, pretty hastily, under very weird circumstances, and then there was a big brawl in the octagon where Ankalaev and Walker wanted to keep fighting when Walker was like, whoa, I didn't mean I wanted the fight to get stopped. I just wasn't happy this dude kneed me in the head when he wasn't, in a position where it was legal to do so. So that's basically what happened. Now, even though the fight only lasted for 3 minutes, it did give us a little bit of insight into how these two match up stylistically, and also gave us a little bit of insight into what Johnny Walker's game plan might be for this matchup that we would not have been able to predict very easily before that fight took place, because even though the fight only lasted for 3 minutes, Walker did a few things a little bit differently that he doesn't usually do. Now, that means that this is a pretty tough break and a pretty tough fight for Walker, because he no longer has the element of surprise on his side. So when this matchup was originally scheduled, it was already a tough stylistic matchup for Walker. We all know Ankalaev is one of the best light heavyweights in the division. In my opinion, is the best light heavyweight in the division. It's just his fight IQ that lets him down. And so, it was already a tough fight for Walker the first time around. And now, even though the first fight only lasted 3 minutes, Ankalaev kind of knows what Walker's game plan is going to be, which makes this fight much harder for Walker now, because if he comes in with the same game plan, Ankalaev is going to be better prepared for it, and if he doesn't come in with the same game plan, well, he's got to think of a new game plan, right? Which is not easy when you're going up against someone like Ankalaev, who's so well-rounded, so damn good at everything. But we will kick things off, as ever, by taking a look at the odds. We've just spoken about it being a difficult fight for Walker, and that is reflected in the odds, with Ankalaev being one of the biggest favourites on the card. Average odds are around 1.18, which is currently minus 556 for an implied probability of 85%. This implied probability calculator threw me off a little bit. Obviously, usually I use the one on my website, but our website's currently under redevelopment. Should be done by the end of January, so I can't use mine at the moment. But that's an implied probability of 85%, pretty steep. If we take a look at the odds on Walker, he's around an average of 5.0, which is going to be plus 400 for an implied probability of 20%. So Ankalaev is 31 years old, 6'3" with a 75-inch reach, and Walker is 31 years old, 6'6" with an 82-inch reach. So Walker is absolutely enormous for the light heavyweight division. He's got the biggest wingspan in the light heavyweight division, possibly even the biggest wingspan in the UFC. He is a big boy. And I don't want to digress and go off tangent too much, but I do think Walker's one of these guys that if he moved up to heavyweight, I think he would do a lot better than he does at light heavyweight. Because at light heavyweight, you've got a lot of very technical, fast, skilled fighters. We know what the heavyweight division's like. Most of the guys up there are big, they're slow, they're clunky. Yes, you've got your Aspinalls, you've got your Gans, you've got your John Jones. But outside of those three, I think Walker would be far more athletic and far quicker than a lot of the guys in the heavyweight division. And he's absolutely massive at 6'6". So I think Walker would have a much better career at heavyweight. I'm sure at some point he will make the move up. You know, at 31 years old, he's still very young for the heavier weight classes, but it's a tough division for him, light heavyweight. You've got well-rounded beasts like Ankalaev, Jamal Hill, Jiri Prohaska, you know, even Alex Ferreira, who's a technician on the feet. It's a tricky division for him. But anyway, back on topic now. How do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, we know that Johnny Walker's biggest weakness is his takedown offense and ground game. Whenever we've seen Walker on the ground, you know, in his fight against Nikita Krylov is a really good example. You can see that Walker just doesn't have much on the ground, and that's being polite. We know that Magomed Ankalaev, very, very high-level combat sambo practitioner, and we know if Ankalaev comes into this fight with a grappling-heavy game plan, he's going to dominate Johnny Walker. I mean, even in their first fight that only lasted 3 minutes, Walker was really struggling to work his way back up to his feet. Now, even though there's a massive skill gap on the ground in this matchup, it doesn't necessarily mean that this fight is a fight where Walker is going to be forced to grapple a lot, because we know Magomed Ankalaev is one of these guys who doesn't have the best fight IQ, and for some strange reason prefers to stand and bang when it would often be smarter and an easier path to victory for him to just grapple. You know, had Ankalaev come into the Jan Blachowicz fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he would likely be the light heavyweight champ right now, or certainly would have won the title against Blachowicz. But for whatever reason, Ankalaev chose to stand and bang with Blachowicz for a few rounds, to the point where Blachowicz was already up big on the scorecards, so that when Ankalaev did go to his grappling in the second half of the fight, it was far too late. And so whenever you're dealing with a guy like Ankalaev that has such a huge advantage over their opponent, guys like Ankalaev can be very frustrating because you can't always trust them to use it. When you look at the odds in this one, if we knew for sure that Ankalaev was absolutely going to go out there and grapple his ass off, these odds would be completely bang on accurate, right? Aside from a flash KO, I wouldn't give Walker much of a chance at all. But we know that Ankalaev likes to stand and bang, and in a stand-up fight, Walker does have opportunities to win this. And to really quantify the chances that Walker has got of winning this matchup, I think we need to talk a bit about Walker's progression as a fighter in the UFC. Because for me, Johnny Walker is one of these guys that plays a bit of a character, very much like Colby Covington in a very different way, but Walker gives off this perception as being like the goofy, fun-loving, like crazy fighter, right? But I actually think he's very intelligent. I actually think he's very smart. Even in the Ankalaev fight, if you go back and watch it, he faked being hurt by a body shot to try and bait Ankalaev into getting overly aggressive so that he could catch him with a big counter. The thing that makes me think Walker is actually very intelligent is what I've noticed from him over the last few years is, from a technical point of view, he's improved significantly since moving to Ireland to train at SBG. But I also have noticed that he does come into every fight with a game plan specific to giving himself the best chance of beating his opponents. And that might sound like an obvious thing if you're watching this. You know, if you haven't been watching UFC for, you know, that long, you might be watching this and thinking, well, yeah, it's obvious. Every fighter is going to come in with a game plan tailored towards beating their opponents. But you'd be surprised how rare it is and how many guys just kind of go in there and wing it, or, you know, don't really change their approach to maximize their advantages and exploit their opponent's weaknesses. A lot of the guys just focus on themselves and not necessarily on the game plan and strategy, whereas Walker really does focus on the game plan and strategy, and I take him seriously because of that. Because what that means is he's coming into this fight very well prepared. He understands Magomed Ankalaev's strengths and weaknesses, and he's coming in aiming to do things that he knows will give him the best chance of causing an upset here. And we saw this in their very first fight, because if we go back and watch Ankalaev's fight against Jan Blachowicz, where, you know, Ankalaev struggled in the first half of that matchup. One of the main reasons why he struggled is because Blachowicz was hammering his legs, right? Blachowicz inflicted a lot of damage with leg kicks, caused Ankalaev a lot of problems with leg kicks. Now, if we look at Johnny Walker's fights from over the last few years, yes, a lot of them have ended quickly, but if we look at the fights like the matchup against Thiago Santos as an example, or the fight against Anthony Smith as an example, leg kicks weren't like a real key aspect of Walker's strategy. They were there, he threw leg kicks, but if you just look at those first 3 minutes against Ankalaev, he was spamming leg kicks over and over again. And we saw Ankalaev react in the same way that he reacted in the Blachowicz fight, and kind of did nothing. He just kind of ate them, he let his opponent have them, and just tried to tough it out like a lot of guys, right? The best example I can think of a guy just trying to tough out leg kicks was Max Holloway the first time he ever fought Alexander Volkanovski. He was just like, fuck it, I'm going to try and tough this out. I'm going to let you hammer that lead leg, because ultimately the best counter to a leg kick is a punch in the face, and I'm going to bet on my boxing to trump your boxing and your leg kicks. And obviously got to the point where before Holloway could even get going, his leg was too damaged to be effective in the fight. And if it hadn't have been for Ankalaev's grappling, kind of bailing him out against Blachowicz, we could have seen a similar fate for Ankalaev, because his leg was severely compromised. But it became less of an issue when Blachowicz was on the ground. So this is one of those matchups where when you look at how they match up stylistically, both like to stand and bang, both are primarily strikers. And while Ankalaev is certainly the more technical striker, the better boxer, he is better defensively. Walker's wild and he's reckless and more of a single shot striker, whereas Ankalaev's got nice combinations. When you look at the size difference between the two, when you look at Walker's unpredictability, how difficult he is to read, you know, his spinning shit, his flying shit, his wild style of fighting, the fact that he can affect Ankalaev's mobility with the leg kicks and set up his bigger strikes if he gets Ankalaev thinking about those leg kicks. There are ways Walker can potentially win this, especially because Magomedov is one of these guys that does like to stand and bang, does like to get into big exchanges, does like to bet on his chin against his opponents, and we have seen him get dinged. We haven't seen him get knocked out, but we have seen him eat big shots. You know, he ate big shots against Thiago Santos, big shots against Blachowicz. You know, he's one of those guys that does put himself in harm's way to try and land a counter. And that can be a dangerous game to play against a big, strong, heavy-handed Brazilian with so many knockout wins on his record. Highlighted rear naked choke win, as I said that. But obviously, when he does get wins with like ground and pound submissions, things like that, it has come off the back of him hurting his opponents bad on the feet first. So it's an interesting matchup because, you know, from a betting point of view, it's very, very difficult to bet Walker in this fight, because if Ankalaev comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, he's screwed. We also know Ankalaev's got better cardio. Ankalaev is the better striker. But whenever you've got a guy like Ankalaev that is a big favourite, that has bad fight IQ and a tendency to get sucked into brawls and sucked into firefights, there's always the potential for the upset. I don't think it's going to happen. I do think skill for skill Ankalaev is the best light heavyweight in the division. But you can't count Walker out in this. And from a betting point of view, that just makes this fight a bit unplayable for me. There's no way that I would touch Ankalaev at these odds. But at the same time, I would be putting my money in far too much danger if I bet Walker. So, it's an easy pass for me, this one. Let's take a look at the over-under and the props, though. Now, the over-under, the main over-under, the high liquidity over-under is set at over 1.5 or over under 1.5 rounds here. This gives me a lot to think about because, on one hand, there's a really good chance this fight will end quickly. Because if you look at Walker's record, the vast majority of this guy's fights end in round 1, right? If we take a look at his fights in the UFC, he's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5... Oh, sorry. 1, 2, 3... 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11... 12 fights in the UFC. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7... 8 of the 12 fights have ended in round 1. I know this was a no contest, but it still ended in round 1, right? So 8 out of his 12 fights have ended in round 1. If we were to just disregard this, it would be 7 of his 11 fights have ended in round 1. Right? It's quite a high percentage. We also know that Ankalaev's not the kind of guy to take a backward step. So even though Ankalaev's fights go deeper and he's more likely to have a fight that lasts longer, he's not the kind of guy to shy away from an exchange. And where you see fights of Ankalaev's that have gone deep, like the Blachowicz matchup, the Santos matchup, even though Blachowicz and Santos are very dangerous, they've shown Ankalaev a lot of respect, and for the most part fought with a counter-striking based game plan, which has meant that the dynamic of the fight meant it was more likely that it would go deep. Now, we've seen Walker also use more cautious counter-striking game plans against guys such as Thiago Santos. But Walker's also one of those guys that doesn't shy away from an exchange, and he will bet on his power. He's not afraid of getting knocked out. So for that reason, you could see this fight ending very quickly. My personal lean is that the fight's more likely to go deep, only because both guys are tough, both are reasonably well-rounded, both guys have got reasonably good cardio as well, but at the same time it's a 5-round fight, and you'd think that they would want to start a little bit slower and pace themselves. They would want to show each other a little bit of respect, knowing how dangerous both of them were. It's one of those matchups where I wouldn't bet the over-under on this. I don't have a strong opinion on it, but I lean more towards the over. In terms of the prop bets on this matchup, Ankalaev by decision is interesting to me. It is interesting to me. Just because if he were to use a grappling heavy game plan, you could see the clock kind of running down closer to a decision. Both guys are tough on the feet. Both guys have shown reasonably good cardio lately. My only concern over Ankalaev by decision would be if Ankalaev were to use a lot of grappling, would that tire Walker out to the point where he'd be completely gassed out of his mind? Because obviously, even though Walker's cardios look good in recent fights that went deep, like against Anthony Smith, Thiago Santos, those fights were stand-up fights. You need a different kind of cardio on the ground. Maybe Walker doesn't have that, because earlier in his career where we saw him grapple a lot in fights like against Nikita Krylov, he did gas pretty badly. So, props. How are we feeling about props? Yeah, I don't love any of the props, if I'm honest. I would probably give them a miss. So, hope you found that useful. If you did, please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate it. It would help give the channel a boost at the start of 2024. I'd really appreciate it. And now let's break down the co-main event between Nicolau and Manel Kape. We've just broken down a rematch, or a fight that is a rematch, right, between Johnny Walker and Magomed Ankalaev. We've got another one here because Manel Kape and Nicolau fought all the way back in 2021. Now, even though this fight is almost 3 years old, what I do find quite interesting about this fight is that I don't feel that neither Nicolau nor Manel Kape have really improved or changed their style of fighting much since their first fight back in 2021. So their first fight is really useful for giving us a lot of information as to how this rematch is likely to play out. It's a great stylistic matchup, and if you do want to bet this fight this weekend, I'm going to show you a couple of clips, a little bit of footage in this breakdown. But I would also recommend, if you're going to bet this fight this weekend, definitely go watch their first fight, because it will show you pretty much everything that you need to see. So this fight was pretty easy to research. Let's kick things off by taking a look at the odds. Kape is a 1.36 favourite, which is going to be minus 278 for an implied probability of 74%. If we take a look at the odds on Nicolau, he's around an average of 3.15, which is going to be plus 115 for an implied probability of 32%. Using someone else's implied probability calculator, definitely throwing me off. But anyway, we've got our first area of topic, really, something very interesting for us to discuss, and that is if Nicolau won their first fight and Allsop has literally just said neither guy has changed that much since their first fight back in 2021, why on earth is Manel Kape a big favourite? That just doesn't make any sense. Because if neither guy's changed very much and Mateus won their first fight, surely Nicolau should be the favourite, right? That's logically the train of thought we should be on. And this is one of those fights where I do think the odds are a little crazy. I choose my words very carefully when I say things like this. I don't want to upset anyone. But I do think you've got to be out of your fucking mind to bet Manel Kape at these odds. I just don't know how anyone could do it. It's mind-blowing to me. Having said that, I do think Kape's more likely to win. But it's just how wide the odds are. If I were Kape in this fight, I would probably have Kape and Nicolau maybe in that even money odds range, but Kape the favourite. So you'd have maybe Kape at like 1.7, 1.8, which would be like minus 125, something like that. And I'd have, Nicolau the underdog, 2.0 plus 100. Kape this big of a favourite is quite wild to me. And I'm going to show you footage of their first fight to explain why. Let's take a look at the tail of the tape, though. So Nicolau, 31 years old, 5'6" with a 66-inch reach. Then you've got Kape, 30 years old, 5'5" with a 68-inch reach. So we can see both guys roughly the same size, roughly the same age. Nothing major going on there. So what I'm going to do is basically talk about how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of footage to kind of back up the things that I say. So in terms of how these two match up on the feet, based on their first fight and the fact that neither of them has improved that much since their first fight, Kape should have a big advantage on the feet. Nicolau is a very good technical striker. He's got good footwork. He's got good movement. But Nicolau really struggled with the power, the physicality, the athleticism of Kape. What we saw from Nicolau in their first fight was pretty much what you see from him in all of his fights. He just kind of circled on the outside, looked to chip away at his opponent from the outside and point fight. Whereas Kape was coming forward, taking control of the centre of the octagon, putting Nicolau on the back foot, and just landing harder, more impactful, more damaging shots. And because Nicolau couldn't match the physicality of Kape, he couldn't really get respect in there or back Kape up, and he just couldn't hurt or damage Kape with strikes in the same way Kape could hurt or damage him. Now, a big issue with Nicolau, a big weakness in his skill set, is that he is one of these guys that does slow down a lot as fights wear on. And because Kape put him under a lot of pressure on the feet, Nicolau had to exert a lot of energy to circle away from Kape and burn through a lot of energy to continue using that counter-striking game plan, which meant that Nicolau faded really hard in that fight. Whereas Kape has got great cardio, he can go hard for 3 rounds no problem. And so, yeah, he wasn't really affected. He fought at the higher pace. He looked better in the second half of the matchup. And I will say this before I show some footage. This is one of those matchups where the main reason why I lean towards Kape in this fight is because I feel he beat himself in their first matchup. It was one of those fights where there were moments in the matchup when Nicolau was absolutely gassed out of his mind, and all Kape had to do was put his foot on the gas and just let his hands go and take the fight to Nicolau, and you could see that Nicolau was ready to just completely cave, and Kape didn't do that. He held back, he was passive, he was tentative, and he just didn't pull the trigger. And this is a problem that I still see in Kape to this day. But in order to understand this weakness in Kape, you really got to understand the dynamic of the fights in which he's engaged in. And so, if we take a look at his last matchup against Felipe dos Santos as an example, you know, what I've just said sounds insane, right? Because Kape and dos Santos went to war. It was an incredible fight. It was one of the best fights on that card, and it was just a stand-up war, toe-to-toe, high action, a wild back-and-forth matchup. So when I say Manel Kape is passive and inconsistent, passive and tentative, doesn't really pull the trigger, well, that contradicts what you saw from him in his recent fight against dos Santos. But Manel Kape is still one of these guys that, even though he talks crazy shit at press conferences and he's very charismatic and forward in post-fight interviews, and he talks like he's the baddest guy at 125 pounds, and you know, his performances against dos Santos would have you believe he's like an aggressive wild horse. With Kape, it definitely takes 2 to tango. And he's one of those guys that in certain stylistic dynamics, he will be aggressive and a guy that fights at a high pace. And then in other dynamics, not so much. Definitely takes a dance partner, because Kape is one of these guys that won't shy away from a scrap. He won't shy away from a brawl. So when you've got a guy like Felipe dos Santos, young, hungry, aggressive, Brazilian shooto box guy, that's a perfect dance partner. They're both going to go toe-to-toe. They're both going to throw down. And that's all gravy. That's when we see Kape at his best. But when you've got someone like Matheus Nicolau that won't engage with Kape and just wants to counter-strike and just wants to circle away and avoid engaging and be very tactical and strategic, that's when you can see these long periods of inactivity from Kape, where he really doesn't do a lot. And he kind of, I think, gets in his own head and spends too much time thinking about what he should be doing rather than just fighting on instinct and letting his hands go. And there were long periods of the Nicolau fight where he would kind of just follow Nicolau around the cage, not doing a whole lot other than giving Nicolau time to recover. And we've seen this weakness creep in with many of Kape's fights. So that's not something that is that easy for me to illustrate showing you footage unless I show you the whole fight, which I can't do because this breakdown video will get very long. But if you go back and watch their first fight and other Kape fights, you'll see what I mean. So that's very interesting, because this is one of those matchups similar to the Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker fight, where, similar to Ankalaev, if Kape shows up and performs to his full potential and just goes out there and lets his hands go, fights at a high pace, throws a high volume of strikes, shows urgency to work his way back up to his feet when he gets taken down. Kape absolutely deserves to be a big favourite. These odds are absolutely justified. They make a lot of sense, and the bookies, the betting public, have absolutely put these odds where they should be. Where these odds are off, in my opinion, is that similar to Magomed Ankalaev, Kape has bad fight IQ and holds back too much at times, is very tentative, passive at times. And whenever you've got these guys that are big favourites like Ankalaev or Kape that have bad fight IQ, you know, a lot of the time they'll go up and they live up to their expectations and they'll look great and they'll get the job done. But then other times, old habits die hard, bad habits will creep back in. They'll put in a poor performance based on weaknesses we've seen from him in the past. And then you're in a situation where you've bet a big favourite at, you know, pretty bad odds that is difficult to recover from, because obviously in order to be profitable betting fighters in this odds range, you need a win rate of like 70%, 7-0, which is not an easy thing to do over the long term on a sport as chaotic as MMA. So Kape is a guy you need to be very careful betting this weekend, even though I do lean towards him, I do favour him. Now, whenever you have a guy like this that's a big favourite and there's a lot of hype behind them and a lot of people are picking this guy to win, the best thing I can do to help people understand what you're getting for your money and the level of risk you're taking on if you're betting a guy like Kape this weekend is to just show you cold, hard footage that can't be denied. That's the best thing I can do. And so, let's do that. Let's do that. Because the one thing we haven't discussed about with this matchup is grappling. And Kape is just one of these guys that has very, very bad takedown defense. And he's very weak off his back. In this matchup, Nicolau has a huge advantage when it comes to grappling. And he showed this in their first matchup. And Kape doesn't seem to be improving in this area. And we'll show you some recent footage to kind of back that up. Well, maybe not recent footage because his fight against Dvorak was a long time ago now. But he's only had one fight since. All we can do is work with the footage we've got available. That was one of his most recent fights. So Nicolau's game plan and strategy coming into this matchup will be to circle away from Kape, to not engage with Kape, and to conserve as much energy as possible to steal rounds with takedowns and grappling. That's what Nicolau's trying to do. And we will show you some footage where you can kind of gauge Nicolau's probability of achieving that goal. So we will start off by showing you Kape's fight against David Dvorak, which was one of his very recent fights, even though it was back in 2022. And we will show you this because obviously it's possible that Kape's takedown defense and ground game could have improved a lot since his first fight against Nicolau 3 years ago. But I believe this fight against Dvorak gives us strong clues that it hasn't. So, skip through. Here we go. Okay, so midway through round 1. And you see Dvorak shoot a takedown here. And Kape pretty much falls over. And this is a recurring theme from Kape. I'm just going to stop it here. Two things you'll notice about Kape's past fights. The first is that he gives up takedowns very easily. There's a good example there. The second is that he's very, very, very weak off his back. Now, he's a very athletic guy and sometimes can just power back up to his feet. But from a technical point of view, very, very weak off his back. So he's been taken down here about 2 minutes 15 seconds into round 1. And again, I don't want to make this breakdown video super long. But you can see Dvorak chilling inside control. And Kape just manages to recover guard, but goes to close guard. Very, very, very weak off his back. Just kind of lies in guard. Just very, very weak. Dvorak is dominating him from top position. We stop the clock here. I'd skip through very quickly. But Dvorak's been holding Kape down easily for a minute now. If we keep going, You know, easily holding Kape down. Kape has absolutely nothing here. He has nothing. He has nothing. He has nothing. And then just hits a Hail Mary reversal off of Kimura that, you know, that type of shit you very rarely see in the UFC these days. He's an athletic freak, right? He's got to be strong. He's got to be athletic to hit a reversal off of Kimura like that. But obviously, it's only pretty low-level guys that get caught with reversals like this. I mean, you know, Kape was fishing for this Kimura reversal for a long time, and Dvorak didn't really address it. He was too busy trying to chip away with ground and pound with his right arm. If he just connects his hands together, Kape's not going to be able to hit this reversal if he's got his hands connected, so long as he anchors his legs underneath Kape's right leg. But anyway, he's more interested in throwing ground and pound with his right hand, and because of that, gets caught with his hands in a cookie jar and gets reversed. But even though Kape got away with that position there and ended the round in a dominant position, he gave up a cheap takedown, looked extremely weak off his back for a minute and a half, didn't really show any urgency to get back up to his feet at all. So that was his fight before his last fight, which means we don't really have any evidence of Kape improving his takedown offense and ground game, because Felipe dos Santos is a striker, right? Primarily a striker. He was a stand-up or shuto box guy. We all know the shuto box style, walk you down, punch a hole in your head, predominantly Muay Thai based style. So we're not going to get a lot of grappling related information from that fight. So now if we take a look at, we go all the way back and we take a look at Nicolau MVP Michael Venom Page coming to the UFC very, very soon. What a fight against Kevin Holland that is. Looking forward to getting into that one. We'll have to do a live stream for that fight. But anyway, now their first fight, right? Matheus Nicolau, Manel Kape. Let's get into it. So, in fact, maybe I could just skim through this matchup and explain to you what is happening. So, here we can see Nicolau shoots the first takedown of the fight. Nice double leg drives through, and Kape just kind of gets caught with this outside trip. So this is 3 minutes left to go in round one. Again, similar to the Dvorak fight, you can just see Kape recovers guard, but is just very weak off his back. And here, this is a mistake Nicolau made. Nicolau gave Kape the space he needed to stand back up here. He was fishing for a guillotine. So he was giving Kape a lot of space to stand back up so he could attack the guillotine. And 9 times out of 10 when you see a fighter do this, all that ends up happening is they end up on the bottom because the fighter will defend the guillotine, or they end up giving their opponent an opportunity to scramble back up to their feet, which is exactly what happened here. The point being, Kape gave up a very easy takedown and looked weak off his back until Nicolau gave him the space to stand back up. But then, a minute later, Nicolau shoots another takedown. It's single leg this time, and again, Kape goes down very easily. Again goes the closed guard, very, very weak off his back. And this time, Nicolau stays heavy and tight from top position, so he doesn't give Kape an opportunity to stand back up. And Kape spends the business end of that round, the final minute and a half of that round, on the ground. Now, if we go into this next round, you can see that Kape is leading the dance, right? He's pressuring Nicolau. He's putting Nicolau on the back foot. And this causes Nicolau to fight in a state of panic, where he starts becoming very predictable, starts to become very uncomfortable with the pressure that Kape is putting on him, and starts to shoot from further outside the range or really telegraph the takedown entries. So in this round, Kape does a far better job of reading the takedown entries coming and stuffing them. And Nicolau is one of those guys that, because he slows down a lot because he slows down a lot as fights progress, he's burning through a lot of energy to continually circle away from Kape and not engage with him. And on top of that, he's in this psychological conundrum where he knows he can't grapple hard and grapple relentlessly, because if he does, he's going to gas himself out, because it takes a lot of energy to do that. So he's trying to circle away from Kape and avoid engaging, so that he's got enough energy to steal rounds with takedowns. That's what's going on here. That's why you're not seeing a lot of grappling from Nicolau here, and you're not really seeing Nicolau commit to the grappling. You see another Steph takedown attempt here. But you're not really seeing Nicolau commit to the takedowns. You know, as soon as Kape starts to stuff it, you know, no chain wrestling from him. He retreats and he goes back to this counter-striking style. But you see positions like this, Kape certainly got a better read on Nicolau. Started to do a better job of popping back up to his feet when he got taken down. And we will continue. So then you start to see signs Nicolau getting tired, body language like this, right? Just tired body language, tired. But anyway, into round 3, good round for Kape. So at this point in the fight, if you're watching this live, you're thinking, it's 1 round apiece. Nicolau won the first round with his grappling. Kape won the second round with his pressure fighting and his striking. Nicolau's very tired. He's not getting near a takedown. This should be Kape's fight to win, right? He's going to go out there against a tired opponent, put a dominant 3rd round in the bank, win the fight easily. It's not what happened. He ended up losing a split decision. No matter how you scored this fight, ultimately, Kape's bad fight IQ, game plan and strategy made the fight closer than it needed to be. So if we hit play again and we continue through this round, what you need to observe if you go back and watch this round is just long periods of inactivity from Kape. And you can see it here, right? You can literally see it here, the range this fight's taking place in. When I just skimmed through the footage of round 2, Nicolau's struggling. He's under pressure. He's on the back foot. He's in panic mode. This is making it easier to stuff his takedowns. He's taking damage. He's getting more tired. If Kape would have just kept that up, he would have won this fight easily. But instead, Kape allows Nicolau space to breathe, time to recover, starts trying to win a kickboxing match in a completely different range in the middle of the octagon. This makes it easier for Nicolau to pace himself. So look at the difference in this range, right? In round 2, relentless pressure. In round 3, they're in the middle of the octagon and, you know, having a nice little point fighting contest. And that's what I talk about with Kape, just very bad fight IQ. You know, even here when he's starting to back Nicolau up, he's not putting the same pressure on Nicolau to have to kind of circle away. And so what invariably happens is, because Kape doesn't make Nicolau work very hard for the first 2 minutes of round 3, Nicolau recharges his batteries, he recovers a little, which gives him more energy to finish round 3 stronger than he would have had Kape just kept that pressure up and kept him tired. So here you go, single leg from Nicolau, and now he's got more energy to chain wrestle a little. But again, not enough energy to establish a dominant position. Kape kind of just pops back up. We continue going. And again, Kape does a far better job of stuffing the takedowns in the second half of the fight. But what this fight illustrates, if you go back and watch it, is 2 things. Kape's takedown offense and ground game is very bad. Second thing it illustrates is bad fight IQ, because this was his fight to win and he kind of threw it away in the 3rd. And I don't see really what's changed coming into this rematch. Yes, obviously Nicolau's style of fighting is very predictable and we know he slows down, and Kape's proven that he's capable of neutralising the threat of Nicolau's wrestling in rounds 2 and 3 and finishing strong. But for me, in order to bet a fighter in this odds range, they have to have no major weaknesses or that their opponent could potentially exploit. For me, Kape has 3 major weaknesses. Bad takedown offense, very weak off his back, bad fight IQ. And for that reason, it's a very difficult fight to bet. Very, very difficult fight to bet. Actual fact, watching that fight back again, that's the second time I've watched it this week. Do view it a little bit differently. I do think Kape is more likely to win now than my initial estimation, where I said Kape should only be a slight favourite. I do still think the odds are wide, but I think instead Kape should probably be more like a 1.50 minus 200, 1.60. Don't know what the money line odds are on that. Minus 167 favourite. I think it's fair the cap, the cap in that 60-65% implied probability range. For me, giving him a 74% chance of winning, a little bit crazy based on how their first fight played out. And I don't think either guy has changed that much, because even though we can look at that and we can say, Kape's going to be way better prepared for this rematch against Nicolau. Nicolau's going to be better prepared as well. Both guys know exactly what to expect from one another, and neither have evolved all that much. So there we have it. Let's take a look at the over-under on this one. So, in terms of the over-under, very, very likely this fight goes to a decision. Both are very well-rounded. The majority of their fights go to a decision. You can see if we go all the way back to Nicolau's debut, this fight went deep. Decision. Yes, you have some quick finishes mixed in, but the majority of Nicolau's fights go deep. Same goes for Kape. Decision. 4 of Kape's 6 fights in the UFC have gone to a decision. So much more likely this fight goes deep. And the over is very tempting on this for me. If I do end up betting the over, which I might, I will obviously post it in the Discord and on the website. Which, if you're not a member of my community, I don't want you to actually look at or join at the moment, because it's being redeveloped. It's an absolute mess. But yeah, if I do end up betting the over, I will let you know. But at the moment, I'm still giving it some more thought. In terms of the props, and just to put a cap on that, I just haven't made my mind up on the over-under yet. It's tempting to bet the over, but I just don't love it. So I need to give it more thought before I decide whether or not I'm going to pull the trigger. It's not me being all secret squirrel and saying, oh, I'll let you know. I'm just not sure about that yet. In terms of the props, I think most likely outcome is Kape by decision. So I'm not going to be betting this myself, because I don't like props. I don't really bet props, not my thing. But if you are the type of guy that likes to bet props, and you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching it more interesting, Kape by decision is probably your best prop on this one. So I hope you found that useful. Again, if you did, please hit the like button below. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I would really, really, really appreciate it. As we get into the next breakdown. And now let's break down the fight between Jim Miller and Gabriel Benitez. One of the very few fights on this card in the even money odds range. And we can see that Jim Miller's odds have been declining this week. Steadily declining. I do definitely favour Jim in this fight. I understand why he's the favourite. Maybe we could show a little bit of footage. It won't be the easiest thing to kind of highlight why I favour Jim in this matchup. But the footage doesn't lie with this one. So let's get into the odds. Currently, Miller is the favourite at average odds are around 1.74. Which is going to be minus 135 for an implied probability of 58%. We take a look at the odds on Benitez. He's around an average of 2.10. Which is going to be plus 110 for an implied probability of 48%. So Jim Miller is 40 years old, 5'8" with a 71-inch reach. Benitez, 35 years old, 5'8" with a 71-inch reach. So both guys identical in terms of wingspan, but there's a... You can't say a big age difference because it isn't. It's only 5 years. However, Miller is 40 years old. And we have seen him decline in a big way. He's got a lot of, chronic injuries, recurring health issues. He's taken a lot of damage in his career. He's been in a lot of wars, and that is obviously taking his toll on his ability to show up and perform to his full potential. And at 40 years old, with the wars Miller's been in, the damage he's taken, he's had over 50 pro fights. Every time we see Miller, he's probably going to have declined a little bit compared to the last time we saw him. But he's still racking up wins. Incredibly at 40 years old, he's proven to be an outlier, at least when you look at results on paper, because he's won 4 of his last 5, which is incredible, really. And to be fair to him, put in a really good performance against Hernandez. It was a close competitive fight. It was a very, very competitive matchup. So, Miller is still capable of hanging with a lot of guys in the division, which is admirable for a guy that has been through so much. And now he faces a younger Mexican who does potentially have some of the strengths that have historically caused Miller problems, right? Sorry, my dog was just putting me off a little bit there. He was barking a little. Okay, so let's get into it. How do these two match up? So, the one thing I would say about these two is they both like to stand and bang. They both like to get into big exchanges. They both like to brawl. What's interesting about this matchup, though, is when you look at the older guy, in this case, obviously Miller, 40 years old, usually those are the guys that you have less faith in when it comes to things like toughness, durability, and just being, like, I guess, more trustworthy. And what by that, what I mean is, a lot of guys in their 40s are quite fragile. It doesn't take much to get them out of there. But Miller's different, right? When we have seen Miller lose in the tail end of his career, it's very rarely been because he's been flash KO'd or just completely imploded. Generally, when Miller's lost, it's because he's been beaten by the better guy. He's been outworked, out-hustled, maybe gassed a bit. He's been outperformed. But Miller's never really crumbled like you see a lot of these older guys crumble. Whereas Benitez has. So even though Benitez is the younger guy, this isn't really one of those situations where you've got like a young, hungry bull who's fresher and more durable and more reliable, taking on a beat-up old veteran who's like made of glass. It's kind of the opposite, where even though Miller should be like that, with all of his injuries, his illnesses, medications he's on, the miles on the clock that he's racked up, he is an outlier in that he's defying trends, is what I would say. He's kind of an exception to the rule. And so what's interesting about this matchup is both these guys like to stand and bang. Both of them like to exchange. Both of them like to get into a firefight. And not only is Benitez worse defensively than Miller, but he's also a little chinny. And we see him get rocked, wobbled, and dropped a lot. What you notice about Benitez what you notice in Benitez is signs of a guy whose reflexes are starting to go, which again is interesting because reflexes are one of the first things to go in older fighters, right? And Mowgli is certainly not young for a lightweight at 35 years old. He's going to be 36 years old in June, which is very old for a lightweight. But the interesting thing is, if I didn't know anything about Gabriel Benitez or Jim Miller, but I had my knowledge of MMA, and I was forced to research this fight and just look at footage of them, and I couldn't look at anything else. And if you said to me, one of these fighters is 35 years old, one of them is 40 years old, which way around do you think it is? I'd think Benitez was the 40-year-old. And the reason why I think Benitez was the 40-year-old is because his reflexes are shot. He quite often reacts to punches and strikes that have landed after they've landed, which is a sign of a fighter on a steep decline. And this is one of the reasons why he gets rocked, wobbled, dropped, knocked out so often. It's because he doesn't see the shots coming. And like we've got the old quote, the shots that knock you out are the ones you don't see coming, right? That's, well-known fact in combat sports. So that's interesting to me because this is one of those matchups where, in my opinion, Jim Miller, from a technical point of view, has an advantage over Gabriel Benitez in every single aspect of MMA. He is I'm not going to necessarily say he's the better striker because Benitez has got good footwork, good movement, great leg kicks. But when you look at the total package of striking, in terms of durability, striking defense, you could maybe say Benitez is more technical, but as a package overall, I think Miller's the better striker. Because what's the point in being the more technical striker if you can't take a shot, right? If Benitez is going to move better and look sharper and land a more diverse range of strikes than Miller, but Miller's, heavy boxing style is enough to knock him out, does it really matter that Benitez is more technical? I mean, not really, right? Don't know if I'm making my point very well there. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not really going to help Benitez be the more technical striker if he can't stand an exchange with Miller without getting hurt bad or knocked out. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And that's what the footage is showing me. Now, that's not to say Benitez can't knock Miller out. It's not going to be difficult to knock out a 40-year-old lightweight with this many miles on the clock. But at least with Miller, there's no evidence that his chin's gone. He's still very tough, still very durable, still very difficult to put away. It's not easy to stand in front of a guy like Alexander Hernandez for 3 rounds. And yes, Miller took a lot of damage in that fight, but he wasn't at any point at risk of being finished. Took a lot of damage. He was tired, but he was comfortable. I struggle to see a situation where Benitez could stand in front of a guy like Hernandez for 3 rounds without getting wobbled or dropped. That's the point I'm trying to make. Now, when it comes to grappling, Jim Miller has got a huge advantage over Gabriel Benitez, to the point where this is like so obvious, or should be so obvious to everyone, that I don't feel I need to back this up with footage. If you just go and watch Benitez's fight against Billy Quarantillo, you'll see that Quarantillo got him down pretty easily and dominated him on the ground. Jim Miller's a decent offensive wrestler, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, crushing grappling control, slick ninja back takes, and just levels and levels and levels and levels above Benitez on the ground. Now, you very rarely see Miller grapple because at 40 years old, he doesn't have the energy to grapple hard for 3 rounds. And we spoke in the Nicolau versus Kape breakdown about how Nicolau's got to manage his output. And when he grapples, he can't just grapple hard all the time. He's got to spend a bit of time pacing himself on the feet to conserve the energy he needs to grapple across the 3 rounds, right? Miller's got to do the same thing. You're not going to see Miller come in with a grappling heavy game plan, spamming takedowns from the first 30 seconds. However, if he were to commit hard to his grappling at any point in the fight, he would likely get Benitez down relatively easily and would definitely dominate him on the ground if he were to get the fight to the ground. So, when you look at how these two match up when it comes to striking and grappling, it's all kinds of bad for Gabriel Benitez. And Miller is better than him everywhere, in my opinion. But there is one advantage that Benitez has in this fight. And it's a pretty big advantage, and it could be the difference. And that advantage is cardio. And this is pretty much what cost Miller in his fight against Hernandez. What you will notice about Jim Miller is he's one of these guys that if he doesn't get the job done early in a fight, he almost always loses a decision. And this is because at 40 years old, Father Time's caught up with him, and he just doesn't have the cardio to go hard with these younger guys for 3 rounds anymore. So while he might be a lot more skilled than a lot of the guys he's facing at this stage in his career, he needs to use those skills to get the job done early, because if he doesn't and the fight goes into the 2nd and 3rd round, he's too tired to then make the most of those skills. And when you look at Gabriel Benitez, he's Mexican, he's got a Latin American blood, he can go hard for 3 rounds, no problem. And so if Miller doesn't get a finish early in this fight, I could see a situation where Miller's too tired in the second and third round to take Benitez down, too tired to match his volume, and you just see Benitez kind of dancing around him, leg kicking him to death. On top of that, we know Benitez's biggest weakness is that he's very chinny. And obviously, the longer the fight goes, the less chance there is of him being knocked out, because the more tired Jim Miller gets, the less chance there is, you know, him being fast enough, sharp enough to generate enough power to deliver a knockout shot. And if we look at Miller's record, it's a very interesting one, because if we look at Miller's portion of his career where... I made myself go blurry. If we look at Miller's portion of his career where he has been on that decline in the tail end of his career, it kind of backs up what I've said about Miller being one of those guys that if he doesn't get the job done early, he almost always loses a decision. Let's take a look at his record. Quick finish, win. Quick finish, win. Quick finish, win. Fight went deep, lost a decision. Fight went deep, lost a decision. Quick win. Fight went deep, lost a decision. Quick win, quick win, quick win. Sorry, quick loss, sorry. Quick win, quick loss. And then lost 3 decisions here. Last time Miller won a decision was all the way back in 2016. 8 years ago, when he would have been 32. So in his prime. So Miller hasn't won a decision for 8 years. So that's something to think about. While he is better than Benitez everywhere, he just doesn't have the cardio to go hard for 3 rounds anymore. So, you know, it's one of those fights where I definitely lean Miller. If he takes Benitez down, Benitez is in a lot of trouble. I could see Miller knocking Benitez out. But his age, his cardio, and the fact that Benitez is a cardio machine, big risk factors. So my lean is Miller, but I don't bet on guys that are 40 years old. Just very difficult to trust them with my money. Work hard for my money. Don't want to put it in a lot of danger. So yeah, this is not a fight I would bet if I were you. But Miller is certainly my lean. In terms of the over-under, we can see a set at over 1.5 rounds in the even money odds range. Again, it's difficult, because Benitez is very fragile, and I could see him get knocked out early. But if Benitez can weather the early storm, get through the first round, very likely the fight goes the distance. Because Miller's so tough and so durable, that I think if the fight does get into round 2, I think the chances of Benitez being finished will be significantly reduced, because he's kind of made it through the stage of the fight where Miller's at his most dangerous in round 1. And because Miller's so tough, I don't think there's much chance of Benitez finishing Miller in rounds 2 or 3. So I understand why the over-under is in the even money odds range, because you can build a case for the fight ending very quickly or going deep. For that reason, I don't have a strong opinion on the over-under. I would not bet it. Now, in terms of the prop bets on this one, what I do find interesting is that the odds on Benitez to win by knockout or TKO are steeper than the odds on Miller to win by knockout or TKO, which I find extremely, extremely interesting, because for me it's far more likely that Benitez gets knocked out in this fight. And if you look at their records, right, when was the last time Jim Miller was knocked out? I mean, I know he's 40 years old, but the last time he was knocked out was 2018 against Dan Hooker, 6 years ago. When was the last time Benitez was knocked out? Well, he was knocked out here. Sorry, he was knocked out here, and he was stopped with strikes here, and he was stopped with strikes here, and he was stopped with strikes here. And it's just been a recurring theme throughout his career where he gets rocked, wobbled, and dropped a lot. So it's just very surprising to me how the bookies and the betting public think it's more likely Benitez wins by knockout or TKO. I think that's wrong. I have very, very strong that is wrong. That is wrong. Far more likely Miller gets a knockout here. In terms of the props, I do think this is tricky. I do think this is tricky. I wouldn't go Miller by submission because he doesn't grapple much. I do think Miller by knockout or TKO is the most likely outcome because Benitez's reflexes look shot and he is very chinny. But the odds are not very good. So I wouldn't bet it. Like, if you really want to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching him more interesting and you don't want to bet the money line, I don't know why you would feel like that. But if you are someone that just wants to bet props, I do think Miller by knockout or TKO is the most likely one to hit. But I do not love the odds at all. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. And if you did, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. As we now get into the next fight, which is going to be Ricky Simón against Mario Bautista. This is an incredible fight. This is amazing matchmaking. But one of those fights that is very difficult to read due to gaps in information that we've got in Mario Bautista, where we just haven't seen a whole lot of his takedown offense and ground game tested by the level of grappler he's facing in Ricky Simón. But what I will do is obviously explain to you what I have seen in the footage so that you can kind of make your own mind up on this one. So we can see that Ricky Simón is the favourite. Average odds are around 1.55, which is going to be minus 182 for an implied probability of 65%. If we take a look at the odds on Bautista, he is around an average of 2.45, which is going to be plus 145 for an implied probability of 41%. So Simón is 31 years old, 5'6" with a 70-inch reach, and Bautista is 30 years old, 5'9" with a 69-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. Yes, they've got different body types. Ricky Simón, small, muscular, compact. Mario Bautista, longer, leaner, and taller. But I don't think size is going to have a particularly big impact on this matchup. Now, a few moments ago I said that this one was difficult to read due to gaps in information. And that's because Ricky Simón is obviously, his biggest strength is his grappling. Mario Bautista is predominantly a striker. And so if the fight stays standing, Bautista is going to have a decent advantage in my opinion. If the fight goes to the ground, Simón will have the advantage. And so in order to predict the outcome of this matchup with any degree of confidence, we need to establish the probability of Bautista being able to keep this fight standing. So we need to know a lot about Bautista's takedown defense. The problem we've got is just by the way that the cards have fallen, and by cards I mean circumstances in life. Even though Bautista's been in the UFC for a very long time, because of the styles of opponents he's faced, we don't really know anything about his takedown defense. The only time we only really saw his takedown defense tested for the first time in his last fight against Damon Blackshear. And even though we can learn a little bit about Bautista's takedown defense and ground game from the Blackshear fight, the problem with the Blackshear fight is that Blackshear took the fight on really short notice, so didn't look good in rounds 2 and 3, which could potentially make Bautista's takedown defense look better in rounds 2 and 3 than it actually is, because he was facing a very tired, underprepared opponent in Blackshear. And if we just quickly go through Bautista's record, Blackshear is obviously a good grappler. Guido Canetti, this fight ended very quickly. Benito Lopez, fight ended very quickly. Brian Kelleher, fight ended very quickly. Jay Perrin, not a particularly strong grappler. Trevin Jones, not a strong grappler. Miles Johnson, not a strong grappler. Jinsu Son, not a strong grappler. Sandhagen, obviously this fight ended very, very quickly. And so, if you look at all of his fights in the UFC, they don't really give us a whole lot of information on what his takedown offense is like. What I can do is show you, quickly just skim through the Blackshear fight, so you can get a look at what we do know about his takedown defense. But unfortunately, in my opinion at least, it is very inconclusive. So What I will say, though, is that Mario Bautista trained at MMA Lab for a long time, trained at the Fight Ready gym for a long time, which are predominantly grappling-based gyms, which you'd think would mean he'd be pretty skilled on the ground, pretty good at defending takedowns, but you never know, man. Drakkar Klose obviously has trained at those gyms in the past, while his takedown defense is a joke. So, anyway, here we are in round 1. So Blackshear gets to the body lock pretty early on and spins round to look for an opportunity to upset Bautista's balance and hit an outside trip. Bautista does a good job of keeping his feet underneath him and working his way over to the cage. So from here, Blackshear is just looking for an opportunity to turn the body lock into a takedown, and eventually just kind of picks Bautista up, dumps him onto the ground. Now, I don't like how Bautista gave this takedown up. It was a pretty cheap takedown to give up. But what I do like is his urgency to scramble back up to his feet. So where we were being critical of Manel Kape's takedown defense when we were researching and studying the footage of him against Dvorak and obviously Matheus Nicolau, the reason why Kape's takedown defense and ground game is so bad is because not only does Kape give up cheap takedowns, but when he's put on his back, he just doesn't show any urgency to explode back up to his feet. I always use Team Alpha Male fighters as the benchmark for fighters that are very good at scrambling back up to their feet. Because if you go and look at any of the Team Alpha Male alumni, TJ Dillashaw, Chad Mendes, Uriah Faber, Cody Garbrandt, even Song Yadong these days is very good at this. What they all do very well is as soon as they hit the ground, they immediately look to explode back up to their feet. And that's kind of what you see Bautista do here. Even though he gives up a cheap takedown, he immediately goes to butterfly guard and looks to use his legs to elevate Blackshear. And he's just looking to get very busy off his back and create space for himself off his back. Now, Blackshear is a big, strong dude that is able to go back into guard and establish top position. But you can see Bautista's very active off his back, and unlike Kape, who just kind of lied on the ground for long periods of time doing nothing, here we can see very quickly Bautista's working to get back up to his feet, and I like that about him. So even though his takedown defense might not be the best, very, very good at working his way back up to his feet from what I've seen. Again, gives up a takedown here, but unlike Kape, who just kind of flops to his back and allows his opponent to rack up top control, Bautista shows a lot of urgency to pop back up. So even though he's repeatedly getting taken down, here you can see he's working to break Blackshear's grip. He's doing all the correct stuff. He is giving up takedowns, but he's doing a really good job of scrambling back up to his feet. And there you can see he turns into Blackshear. And just kind of sprawls out of the takedown. Still jumping on a guillotine, which is a terrible idea. But again, even after making a mistake jumping on that guillotine, is able to pop back up pretty quickly because Blackshear gave him a load of space. Anyway, MMA is a chaotic sport. So, unfortunately, that 5 minutes of footage there is pretty much all we've got to work on or work with when it comes to gauging Bautista's chances of keeping the majority of this fight standing. Because into that second and third round, with Blackshear taking the fight on short notice, he just became tired and then really struggled to get his grappling going. So, what that first round of the Blackshear fight tells me about Bautista is that his takedown defense isn't very good, and that Ricky Simón will be able to get him down. Ricky Simon's offensive wrestling is very good. His chain wrestling is very good. And unlike guys like Nicolau and Jim Miller, Simón is different in that he's got the cardio to grapple hard and persistently grapple hard for 3 rounds. Ricky Simón has got that prime John Fitch energy where he can just stick to you like glue, wet blanket you, grind hard for 3 rounds, no problem. And so, what the first round of Bautista's fight against Blackshear tells me is that I don't think he's going to be able to stop Ricky Simón from taking him down. However, what you'll notice about Ricky Simón is that he's one of these guys that does screw around striking way more than he should. So even though he's one of the best offensive wrestlers in the division, he's a great offensive wrestler, persistent wrestler, great chain wrestling. He's one of those guys that if you start popping back up to your feet quickly after he takes you down, I'm not going to say he'll abandon his grappling, because he doesn't, but he starts to grapple way less. So for example, say 2 minutes into the first round, Ricky Simón takes his opponent down and they can't get back up to their feet, and he just dominates them with his grappling. Simón is then far more likely to go and grapple hard in the second and third round as well, because he knows he has a clear path to victory in that area and he can have a lot of success in that area. But say Ricky Simón shoots a takedown on his opponent 2 minutes into round one, gets it, but his opponent pops back up to their feet 30 seconds later, which, to be fair, Bautista is capable of doing. What you then see is far less grappling from Simón, where he will maybe only shoot 1 or 2 takedowns per round, won't really chain wrestle that hard, won't really persistently grapple that hard. And that's what makes this fight extremely interesting, because Bautista's got really good cardio. So it's not like Ricky Simón's going to be able to wear Bautista down with his grappling. It's not like this is going to be one of those fights where even if Simón isn't able to hold Bautista down for long, the fact that Simón will have put such a big pace on Bautista early in the fight means that Simón can have a lot more success striking in the second half of the fight and close that skill gap, because he will have worn his opponent down so much with grappling. I don't think that's going to happen here. I think Bautista's cardio is so good that he's going to continue to have a decent advantage on the feet for the full 15 minutes. And so this is one of those matchups where Ricky Simón absolutely has to use his grappling to win this fight. And that makes this really interesting, because based on the Blackshear performance, I'm quite optimistic for Bautista's chances of relatively quickly working his way back up to his feet when Simón takes him down. And historically, when we've seen Simón face guys who can do that, he tends to stand and bang and strike a lot more than he should. And if he does that against Bautista, he could end up losing this, because I think Bautista is going to outstrike him on the feet, and that makes for a very interesting stylistic matchup. So in my opinion, based on what I've seen, Bautista's a very live underdog. Now, if you were to bet on him, it's going to be a gamble, because we don't know a lot about his ability to work his way back up to his feet against a grappler as good as Simón. But there were flashes and signs in that Blackshear performance. The Bautista's a pretty tough guy to hold down. And so this is a really interesting fight, guys. Definitely dog or pass. I would not be betting Ricky Simón at these odds. You know my style of pre-fight betting. Live betting's my speciality. So when I do pull the trigger pre-fight, I want to be betting on guys that have big obvious advantages over their opponents, where I'm overwhelmingly stacking the odds in my favour. That's not the case with Bautista, because there are unanswered questions over his grappling. But this is an interesting fight. I think Bautista's one of the livest underdogs on the card, because if Simón can't hold him down for very long, I think Bautista's going to outstrike him. It's a real interesting fight, this one. I hope you found that useful. But we got to talk about the over-under and the props. So, very likely the fight will go the distance. It's kind of reflected in the odds, although, to be fair, I thought the odds would be steeper on fight to go to decision, only because if you look at Simone's record, even though he has finished a lot of opponents recently, aside from Jack Shaw, Gaetano Perello is obviously a very low-level guy. Rafael Assunção is over 40 years old. When you look at how Simone's fights have gone against, reasonably skilled fighters in their prime, they've gone deep. Song fight almost went the distance. Went the distance with Kelleher, distance with Borg, distance with Font, distance with Rani Yaya, distance with Montel Jackson, went deep with Merab. If you look at Bautista's record, similar sort of story. He does have a lot of quick finishes, but whenever he faces someone reasonably skilled, reasonably well-rounded, the fight's got a tendency to go deep. And so, I do think it's more likely this fight goes the distance. Again, I haven't made my mind up on this one yet. This is not a secret squirrel moment. If I do end up betting the over-under, I will post it obviously in our Discord. Haven't made my mind up on it yet. But I do think this one's quite likely to go deep. Just because of how they match up stylistically. Because if you look at... The reason why I say that is because both guys are very tough and durable on the feet. And even though they do have the odd win by knockout here and there, for the most part they're both volume strikers. Then if you look at the ground... Simone's a very high level grappler, so unlikely Bautista would submit Simone. And Simone's more of like a control guy. He doesn't really go for submissions. So if Simone were to use a grappling heavy game plan, I don't think he would finish Bautista. I think he would just kind of grind him out and win a decision. So in actual fact, rather than betting on either guy to win this fight, it might be safer and smarter to bet on the fight to go to a decision. See my logic behind that? Both guys not that dangerous on the feet. Both got good cardio, so neither guy's really going to get tired and get stopped late on. Simone not really a finisher on the ground. Fight goes a distance is interesting to me. How have the odds moved on this? There's not enough data really. Okay, anyway. In terms of props... What are we saying about props? Do you know what? I was hoping the odds on Bautista to win by decision would be better than this. For me, it's not a massive difference between taking Bautista at like 4.75 or just betting him straight. I mean, there is a big difference in odds, but in terms of the amount of extra risk you take on betting a highly specific outcome like Bautista by decision, if you really thought Bautista had a good shot of winning this, you should just bet the money line and not get greedy. So on that note, props are a bit dead on that fight because I do think the fight's going to go deep, and the odds on both guys to win by decision are a little bit dead. I don't think neither of them present you with a particularly good risk to reward ratio. So now, if we just check the football scores, we can now get back into the final fight that I want to break down on this card. Let's break down the fight between Phil Hawes and Bruno Ferreira, the Hulk. So this is another fight in the even money odds range, and we can see that Bruno Ferreira is the slight favourite at average odds of around quite a big odds spread. We'll say 1.77, which is going to be minus 130 for an implied probability of 57%. We take a look at the odds on Hawes. He's around an average of 2.05, which is going to be plus 105 for an implied probability of 49%. So Hawes is 35 years old, 6 foot tall with a 77.5 inch reach, and Ferreira is 31 years old, 5 foot 10 with a 72 inch reach. So, don't think age is going to play much of a factor in this one. Both guys are about the same height. but we can see that Hawes has a massive 5-inch reach advantage, which is interesting because one of his best performances in recent years was against Deron Winn, where he also had a big reach advantage. The irony, so if you go back and watch that fight, Hawes didn't do a particularly good job of using his reach because he fought a lot on the inside, throwing elbows, which is a very bizarre strategy, and ended up in Hawes taking actually a lot more risks and a lot more damage than he needed to. So this is a very, 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 very interesting fight, man. And obviously, whenever fights are in the even money odds range, I want to give you guys a strong lean, right? For our even money bets, I want to try and align ourselves with the fighter who is more likely to win. So hopefully we can keep those even money bets grinding profits. But quite often with even money bets, you do run into fights where I just don't really have an opinion on them. And I'm not going to say this is one of those fights where I don't have any opinion at all, but this is certainly one of those fights where I don't have a strong lean either way. And I do think it's probably bang on that they're in the even money odds range. My lean is definitely Bruno Ferreira, but it's tough to feel a whole lot of confidence in him because we don't know that much about him. Even though he's had 11 pro fights, if we look at his record, you can see that they've all ended very, very quickly. You know, even the fights that went into the second round have ended very early in the second round. This one 1 minute into round 2. This one 12 seconds into round 2. All of his other fights have ended in round 1. So for me, Ferreira is a bit of an unknown. I mean, we know what his style of fighting is. He's a slugger, right? He's a heavy-handed, flat-footed slugger with big power. The reason why he's got so many knockout wins on his record is because he just wants to stand and bang. And he does have big power. But outside of that, we don't really know much about him. Haven't really seen any of his takedown offense. Haven't really seen much of his offensive wrestling. And in terms of his cardio, we have absolutely no idea how this guy is going to look if the fight goes past round 1. You know, he could have the best gas tank in the world. He could have the worst gas tank in the world. All we know is this guy hits hard. He's a slugger. He likes to stand and bang. That's literally all we know. So from a technical point of view, you've got to give Hawes a lot of advantages here. He moves well. He throws a diverse range of strikes. He's very fast. He's very athletic. He's an excellent MMA grappler, even though we don't always get to see a whole lot of it. Hawes is just one of these guys that has, I'm not going to say has 3 weaknesses, but there are 3 things that have intermittently cropped up throughout Phil Hawes' career which have consistently cost him. And it's difficult to call these 3 things weaknesses because they don't always present themselves. Like, they're not always weaknesses in fights. But it's one of those situations where we've seen 3 things cost Hawes in the past, and they'll each one will individually and randomly pop up at time to time to cost him, right? But they're not always present. Let me explain. The first issue we've seen Hawes, or the first issue we've seen cause that's a tongue twister, man. We need to start again. The first issue that we've seen cost Hawes is that at times he's looked very chinny. Hawes is a guy that we've seen get rocked, wobbled, and dropped a lot. But at the same time, there have been other fights where he's eaten big shots and looked very durable. So it's hard to call him chinny, but at times he's looked chinny. Then, something that's let him down is his cardio. At times in his career, his cardio's looked very bad, or he's adrenaline dumped and faded very hard early in fights. But then at other times his cardio's looked very good. And we've seen him in wars where he's been able to outwork and outpace his opponents over a 3-round war of attrition. So it's hard to say he's got bad cardio too. And then the third issue that's cost Hawes is bad fight IQ, bad decision making. Even in his fights against Deron Winn, where he's got a huge reach advantage and he's cruising, for some reason he tried to fight Deron Winn in a phone booth. And it worked out for him, but there was no need to fight like that. He ended up putting himself in way more danger than he needed to, and also ended up, you know, taking a lot more damage than he needed to. And so Hawes is one of these guys that is just very difficult to trust because he's got those 3 interchanging issues, And I feel like he's one of those guys that just finds ways to lose. I feel Hawes is one of these fighters that is very, very, very skilled everywhere, but can't get out of his own way. And it might be bad luck. I don't know what it is. He just finds ways to lose. It's very, very difficult to trust a guy like Phil Hawes with your money. So, with this matchup, the reason why I don't have a strong opinion on it or a strong lean is because we've got two fighters that are very difficult to trust with your money for very different reasons. Right? It's kind of like a pick your poison fight. Do you go with Phil Hawes, that we know a lot more about, but we know at times has looked chinny, at times has shown bad fight IQ, and at times has shown bad cardio, but at other times has shown very good cardio, very good fight IQ and very good performances, and a very good chin and durable, right? It's like Jekyll and Hyde. What side of Hawes are we going to get? Unfortunately, the bad side of Hawes is the side we get more often, and that's one of the main reasons why I'm leaning more towards Ferreira in this fight. But do we go with Hawes, right? Sometimes there's a saying, I don't know if this is like a saying worldwide, but in the UK we've got a saying, better the devil you know, right? Sometimes you're better off picking the devil because you know exactly what you're getting with the devil than the unknown, because you don't know what you're going to get from the unknown. You might get the devil on steroids, right? You might get something way worse than the devil. Better the devil you know. Do you go with Hawes? You know exactly what you're getting with him. Or do you go with the Hulk, Bruno Ferreira, who's the only person in the history of the world I've ever seen spell the name Bruno with two N's. My wife actually, when she saw me writing Bruno's name out on the website, was like, there's a spelling mistake. I'm like, no, this guy just spelled his name differently to everyone else. Wow, if that is his full name, fuck me. Bruno Clinton Angulski Santiago Ferreira. That is one hell of a name. I only just noticed that. But anyway, better the devil you know. Do you go with Hawes, or do you go with the unproven guy who we literally know nothing about? I'm going to go with the unproven guy, but not with any amount of confidence at all. Especially with the fact that Hawes has a pretty big reach advantage over him. I mean, how do you break down a fight like this? Based on what we've seen, we don't know how big of an advantage Hawes would have on the ground, because we haven't seen any of Ferreira's grappling. We'd assume because Hawes is a very good MMA grappler that he would have a big advantage on the ground, but Hawes seems to prefer to want to stand and bang in every fight anyway, so will that even matter? Now when it comes to striking, Hawes throws a more diverse range of strikes than Ferreira. Hawes moves better. Very, very nasty kicking game. Hawes has got brilliant leg kicks, brilliant body kicks. He's explosive. For me, Ferreira just looks like a heavy-handed, one-dimensional slugger. I don't know what to say about this fight. It's a tricky one. Let me know what you think in Discord. Or let me know. Just leave me a comment. Let me know what you think, man. It's a tricky one. I'm going to lean Ferreira. Hard to trust Hawes. It's a tough fight. It's a tough fight, boys. It's a tough fight. In terms of the over-under on this one, obviously, because Ferreira has barely ever been past round one, you'd assume it's pretty likely this one will end inside the distance, especially because it's very rare Hawes goes to a decision. Only 2 of his fights in the UFC have gone to a decision. Only 3 have gone past round 1. But unfortunately, the odds reflect the fact that the fight is very likely not to go to a decision. Too steep to bet. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't be betting the over on this one. In terms of props, bookies are calling Ferreira by knockout or TKO as the most likely outcome. Man, I don't know. It's very difficult, right? With props, we're talking about highly specific outcomes. So without knowing very much about Ferreira, very difficult to know. Very difficult to give a prop. You know what I mean? because we don't know how this guy is going to look in rounds 2 or 3. We don't know how he's going to look if Hawes takes him down in the first 30 seconds. We just don't know. So I don't know. So I hope you found that useful. You probably didn't, because I didn't really help you with anything. Just kind of fucking jibber-jabbered for a few minutes. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, please help give this video a big boost to kick off 2024. Get me some more subscribers. Really appreciate it. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, leave me a comment. I read all your comments, love the positive vibes. Let me know who you're betting this weekend. If you think I got anything wrong in these breakdowns, if you think I'm a clown, an idiot, a clueless fool, should not be talking for an hour and 30 minutes about cage fighting, let me know what you think. Till next time, take care everyone. I'll be back actually with some live streams next week for that Strickland and Duplessis card, because it's a banger. Have a great week, guys. Have a great weekend. Hope you make loads of money. I'll see you all very soon. Nice one, guys. Bye.